If you have ever wondered what hell on earth looks like, the prisons you're about to see might just be the answer. While they're not filled with burning flames, you will find tortured souls teeming with pain, anguish, and relentless torment. Inside are the worst criminals, the brutal murderers and child predators who face fierce daily fights for survival. Join us as we take a look inside these prisons that are worse than death. Black Dolphin. In Russia, criminals who commit heinous crimes of abuse against women and children, cannibals, mass murderers, and terrorists, have one thing in common, and that is Penal Colony No. 6, also known as Black Dolphin Prison. This Russian prison isn't just another high-security facility. It's considered one of the most dangerous places in the world. It's often compared to terrible places in history due to its harsh conditions, even leading some inmates to take their own lives. As inmates arrive at Penal Colony No. 6, the first thing they notice is a big statue of a black dolphin outside. The inside is so quiet that it feels strange. The inmates are locked away, and you can barely tell anyone is there. What goes on behind those thick doors is a mystery, but the silence is filled with a heavy feeling. Although prisoners spend almost all their time in their small cells, they do get to come out sometimes. Maybe for some fresh air in the exercise yard, or a trip to the prison hospital. But in Black Dolphin, moving prisoners isn't done in any regular way. Since these are some of the most dangerous criminals, handcuffs alone aren't enough. They are blindfolded and guided by guards to make sure they don't learn the layout of the building and try to escape. It's a very strict environment. In this prison, inmates are kept in total isolation. Instead of just one heavy door, there are 3 doors. First, a thick metal door locks them in their cell, followed by 2 more cage doors. It's like being stuck inside a tiny fortress. Even if someone could get past all 3 doors, they would still have to deal with cameras that are always watching. Guards monitor these cameras 24/7, which is why no one has ever escaped. To be extra safe, guards walk around the prison every 15 minutes. If you think you could unlock all 3 doors and run away before getting caught, you'd have to be really fast. As prisoners shuffle along, they might be treated harshly by guards, and loud, heavy music plays to make them feel even more scared. Unfortunately, this kind of mistreatment happens regularly at Black Dolphin. One inmate, Roman Sarachev, sadly died from being beaten shortly after arriving at the prison. The truth is, prison staff aren't very open about what happens inside. Guards are supposed to wear cameras to keep track of things, but funny enough, these cameras often stop working when something bad happens, like when a prisoner gets hurt. In Sarachev's case, there's footage of the attack, but none of him dying. Isn't that strange? When Sarachev's body was taken to the morgue, the staff told his grieving family that it looked like his body had been thrown around like a toy, covered in strange bruises. This doesn't sound good at all. Medical care in Black Dolphin Prison is almost non-existent. Inmates often have to wait a long time for help, and even those with serious illnesses like HIV and AIDS sometimes go without treatment. It's estimated that about 1/3 of the deaths in the prison are related to AIDS. Plus, this prison has been around since 1745, so it's not exactly clean. Sickness spreads easily. It may sound incredibly harsh, and it truly is, but gaining a deeper understanding of the inmates reveals why they can appear so intimidating. Black Dolphin Prison houses approximately 700 prisoners who have collectively harmed over 3,500 people, an average of about 5 victims each. Crossing them would be a serious mistake. If you're curious about the identities of these inmates, here's a brief overview. First up is Alexei Pichugin, a former KGB officer who is responsible for the deaths of 4 of his business rivals. He took getting rid of the competition a bit too far. Surprisingly, this is probably one of the more normal crimes here. Next, there's Igor Tishenko, who was involved in a gang shootout with his father in Moscow, which resulted in 7 deaths and more injuries. Now both father and son are behind bars. Then we have Nikolai Ostankov, who harmed a family of 5 and burned their bodies. That's not a story you hear every day. Lastly, there's Vladimir Nikolaev, After a drunken fight, he accidentally hurt a man. Instead of calling for help, he did something very strange. He cut up the body. While looking at the pieces, he wondered what human meat tasted like. He boiled part of the thigh but didn't like the taste. Hoping to improve it, he tried frying it. And to his surprise, it tasted better. To cover up his actions, he shared some of the body with a friend, claiming it was kangaroo meat, knowing his friend wouldn't be able to tell the difference. The friend unknowingly served it in dumplings to his family. And yet, he's still not the worst of the bunch. Mikhail Popkov is known as one of the most dangerous criminals in history. He confessed to committing 81 terrible acts, including taking the life of many people. The Russian media even gave him the nickname the Werewolf. Ironically, he used to be a police officer. But one thing is clear. Life in Black Dolphin prison is really tough. There is not much hope for these prisoners to be released. Most of them will stay in Black Dolphin for life. One guard sadly said that the only way to leave was by dying. The U.S. is also caught in this web of deliberate ill treatment of inmates. Red Onion. This state prison is situated in Pound, Virginia, a struggling town in northern Wise County. The facility features 4 housing units with recreation yards at the center and a centrally located kitchen. It's surrounded by 2 fences topped with razor wire, and while there are only 2 guard towers, armed officers stationed in those towers provide complete coverage of the fence line. What happens inside the prison is largely indescribable and can be terrifying, even for the most dangerous criminals. In January 2022, Anwar Phillips was found dead in his cell, raising questions about how a man in a single cell could acquire the means to end his own life. Authorities claimed that another inmate, William Pettigrew, had passed a hand-braided rope to Phillips, which he then used to take his own life. Pettigrew was initially charged with murder, but after months of investigation, including reviewing available surveillance footage, the charges were ultimately dropped. There were also concerns that staff were not doing the required 40-minute checks on inmates in their cells. Phillips's mother begged the media for answers, but it does not look like she will be getting any closure on the incident. One of the most infamous cases in the Virginia prison system involved Robert Gleason, who took the life of another inmate at Red Onion. Gleason was already in prison for murder and had killed his cellmate at Wallens Ridge State Prison. While awaiting sentencing on that case, Gleason became upset because he wanted to receive the death penalty. He told the court that if he did not receive capital punishment, then he would kill again. Due to his frustration, he lured Aaron Cooper, who was in the neighboring recreation cage, over to him. Through a wire fence, he strangled Cooper. Following this incident, Gleason received his wish and was executed by the state of Virginia on January 16, 2013. This place isn't just another prison. It feels like a callous and sad place to be. MC Gaskins, who spent 14 years at Red Onion, shared some really troubling stories. He talked about getting hurt and being treated in ways that no one should ever experience. Sometimes, the prisoners don't even get the basic necessities, like soap, toothpaste, or books. Every day is a challenge for them, just to keep their dignity. Kevin Rashid Johnson, an artist in the prison, has been tracking many times when officers were not nice to the inmates. His reports show that life at Red Onion often involves a lot of violence and mistreatment. To try to change these tough conditions, inmates at Red Onion started a hunger strike on May 22, 2012. They wanted everyone to know how hard their lives were. They made 10 requests, like wanting better food, more access to complaints forms, decent living conditions, and proper medical care. They strongly stated, "No matter our differences, we are all treated unfairly here. We may be seen as rivals, but now we are coming together because we're tired of being treated badly." While Red Onion officials said the hunger strike ended within a week, supporters of the inmates argued that the prison tried to isolate the strike leaders and prevent them from communicating with others outside. There's no question that the system is deliberately designed to oppress the inmates, with the wardens making life feel like a living nightmare. But imagine how much more terrifying it would be if prisons were run by both the inmates and the government working together in corruption. La Modelo. This prison, which ironically called the Model Prison, is a harsh and daunting jail located in Bogotá, Colombia. It holds around 11,000 inmates and has a reputation for being extremely violent. The prison is split into two main sections: the North Wing, which is home to left-wing rebels, and the South Wing for right-wing supporters and paramilitary groups. Unfortunately, the area in between these wings often becomes a battleground, leading to many fights and even tragic losses of life. Inside this gloomy prison, guards don't carry weapons, but the guards in the watchtowers are armed with rifles. Shockingly, some prisoners even have access to guns and grenades, making the environment very unsafe. Members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia train in their own section of the prison. There are also restaurants inside, including one run by FARC, which provides free meals for the left-wing rebels. In April 2000, a horrific event occurred when over 100 prisoners lost their lives during violent clashes. The riot began when a paramilitary leader was killed, sparking a fierce battle that went on for 12 hours. This intense conflict sadly resulted in 32 people losing their lives instantly, and many others getting hurt, making it one of the most violent days in any Colombian prison. The tragedy prompted the government to change how the prison was managed. Many shops were shut down and security was tightened, but inmates still found ways to get their hands on weapons. In 2016, the remains of at least 100 prisoners and visitors were shockingly discovered in drain pipes within the jail. Then, in March 2020, a riot broke out because people were scared of the COVID-19 virus spreading. This chaotic situation led to at least 23 prisoners being killed and many others injured. On May 16, 2024, the prison director was tragically shot and killed while returning home from work. Despite the presence of government officials at this prison, chaos still reigns. We've seen how terrifying prisons can be when controlled by both inmates and corrupt officials. Now just imagine the chaos and danger of a prison entirely run by the inmates themselves. La Sabaneta Prison. The Maracaibo National Prison, also known as Sabaneta Prison, was a very frightening and harsh place in Maracaibo, Venezuela. It was managed by the Ministry of Prison Systems from 1958 to 2013 and gained notoriety for its extreme violence and terrible living conditions. The prison was overcrowded, housing over 3,700 inmates despite being designed for only 700. Many prisoners lived in awful conditions, lacking enough food, clean water, and medical care. Inside, gangs dominated the environment, led by a powerful figure known as a Pran. One inmate, Oswaldo Espina, experienced the horrors of Sabaneta Prison firsthand. He described a nightmarish environment filled with prisoners wielding guns, Molotov cocktails, and knives. The riots in this prison drew international attention to the shocking conditions inside Venezuelan jails. But this wasn't the only violent incident to occur at Sabaneta. The Pran, who was incarcerated for triple homicide, managed drug sales and prostitution within the facility. Edwin wasn't just any prisoner. He was a kingpin. When the government announced the closure of Sabaneta, he fought fiercely to keep his empire intact. He didn't want to leave his kingdom behind. After 50 years of being out of control, the government finally decided to close the prison, and it is now being transformed into a museum. The prison had several different areas, one for soldiers and police, another for less serious offenders, and a separate section for the most dangerous criminals. Sadly, around 192 children lived there with their parents. The prisoners often took charge of the prison themselves, which only made the situation worse. On January 3, 1994, a huge riot broke out. The prison turned into a wild scene when inmates set it on fire. While the flames raged, some prisoners hurt others who tried to escape. More than 150 people died that day, making it one of the worst prison disasters ever. Smaller riots happened all the time, too. There weren't enough guards to keep things safe, which let gang violence grow. In 2013 alone, 69 prisoners lost their lives because of this violence. The prison's collapse was unavoidable. With as few as 8 wardens on duty at any given time, gang violence ran rampant. It was a lawless place where survival meant aligning with the most powerful gang. Government raids often uncovered huge caches of weapons and drugs, but the most astonishing find was a collection of animals. The prison housed farm animals, pedigree dogs, and even endangered species. Among the surprising residents were an ocelot, turkeys, raccoons, and a pair of macaws. It was as if Sabaneta had transformed into a bizarre zoo. This place wasn't just a prison, it was a war zone. It's hard to say which is worse, cruel government-run prisons or underground societies controlled by inmates. We'll let you decide with the next video. Guantanamo Bay. In this prison, doctors, who usually help others, are told to ignore their rules and assist the guards in making the prisoners' lives even harder, though they stop short of taking anyone's life. After a very restless night, many prisoners start their day feeling tired. If they manage to sleep at all, they should consider themselves lucky. The guards often make sure that the prisoners can't get enough rest by slamming doors and stomping around loudly at night. At 8 in the morning, the national anthem plays for the guards, signaling the start of another hard day. Inside their tiny cells, the prisoners sit behind heavy steel doors. Their little rooms measure just 2.4 meters at the widest point and 1.8 meters at the narrowest, with walls made of wires that feel like cages. Inside each cell, there are only a few basic items. The bed is just a thin sleeping mat and a cheap blanket. They have 2 buckets for waste. At least it's better than having only one. They also receive a towel, a washcloth, toothpaste, soap, and shampoo. Some special items, like a skull cap, prayer beads, the Quran, and a prayer rug, are given to them. But not much else. They are encouraged to feel grateful for even these small things. Sometimes prisoners might find themselves handcuffed, blindfolded, or wearing a mask for many hours. Thankfully, not every night is this bad. This isn't a scene from a scary movie or a story from a long time ago. It's happening in a prison operated by the United States, known as Guantanamo Bay. Most people have heard of it, and many have their own opinions about what goes on there. Some believe it's a place of human rights violations, while others think it's necessary to keep the world safe. However, finding trustworthy information about Gitmo is quite difficult. Journalists and photographers face strict rules about what they can show, as there are concerns about violating privacy. To visit the prison, one needs special permission from the military base commander. Most of the visitors are workers from the base or families of military personnel, as journalists are rarely allowed in. When thinking of Cuba, people might picture vibrant dancing, beautiful beaches, or even catchy songs. But you might wonder how such a place ended up housing some of the world's most dangerous detainees in such a tough prison. Over the years, many hunger strikes have happened at Guantanamo, but the biggest one was in 2013, with more than half of the prisoners participating. After that, the government stopped sharing information about what was happening inside. A hunger strike might not sound like a serious crime, but it's a strong way for the prisoners to show their anger, making things even more complicated. The guards were likely very stressed out and took steps to discourage any more hunger strikes. To punish those who refused food, some prisoners had their basic needs taken away, like blankets, shoes, and even medical supplies. Some had to sleep on the cold concrete floor. Sometimes, food was left in a prisoner's cell all day just to tease them, knowing they hadn't eaten in a long time. It's hard to know what's happening now or if hunger strikes are still going on, but we do know that most prisoners are kept in areas called Camps 5 and 6. In these camps, there are shared spaces for well-behaved prisoners, where they can watch a few TV channels. While this might sound okay, there's also a secret Camp 7 for high-security detainees, where no one from outside is allowed to enter. It's hard to imagine what goes on there. In the past, Guantanamo Bay even had Camp X-Ray, where prisoners were kept in small cages surrounded by barbed wire. Many things about Guantanamo Bay remain unclear and mysterious. Breakfast time comes to an end. What happens next? If it's a quiet day, prisoners might get the chance to take a shower. Just remember, not to drop the soap. After that, there's a bit of time for personal activities like praying, thinking, or trying to get some sleep before a visit from the doctor. Although it seems strange to see a doctor every day, it makes sense given the tough conditions. Nearby, there are around 1,000 military personnel stationed at the base. Life isn't easy for them either, as they deal with daily challenges like being splashed with waste from prisoners and then having to check for any illnesses afterward. You might be curious about what happens to the inmates during these interrogations. The goal is to make prisoners feel helpless, so they will stop resisting and give up information. One common method is sensory deprivation, where prisoners are isolated for long periods. Even though there's no solid proof that these techniques harm people, some lawyers believe they are still legal. But it's not just mental techniques used. There's a team that handles forceful extractions, which sometimes leads to injuries. Every day, prisoners wear shackles that make their ankles swell. One method is called water dousing, where prisoners are placed on plastic tarps, shackled, and cold water is poured over them, making it hard to breathe. Sometimes they're put into tiny boxes or kept in uncomfortable positions. There's even a story of a prisoner being hung from a shackle until it was very painful. Humiliation is another tactic, with methods like forced nudity and aggressive searches. One prisoner was dragged through his own urine during an interrogation. Because of these harsh methods, many prisoners who survive end up with issues similar to those experienced by prisoners of war, like PTSD and depression. Right now, there are only about 40 prisoners left at Guantanamo Bay, and many people want the government to close it for good. But it's complicated. When President Obama tried to shut it down, he ran into a problem. There was nowhere for the detainees to go. Congress made it illegal for anyone at Guantanamo to be sent to the U.S. for any reason, even for a trial or medical care. This has led many prisoners to become forever prisoners, meaning they may never face charges or go to court. If someone is convicted of a war crime, they might be sent back to their home country, but many countries don't want to take back prisoners known for serious crimes. Some end up in other prisons around the world that are just as mysterious. On the bright side, some recent visitors have said that conditions at Guantanamo Bay might be better than they used to be. Some believe that the U.S. government is trying to improve the treatment of current prisoners compared to those in other prisons. Yet, there's still some evidence that sleep deprivation is being used. What happens when the government tries taking control of an inmate-ran prison? Mendoza Prison. In Mendoza province, the prison system puts inmates through extremely harsh conditions. The prisons are overcrowded, dirty, and full of mistreatment. Sadly, some prisoners even lose their lives because of the terrible environment. Inmates are often locked in their small cells for long periods and face unfair punishments from guards. Since February 2004, 22 inmates have died in suspicious ways. Mendoza Prison in Argentina was designed to hold far fewer people, but now it holds about 3 times its capacity. The situation is awful, with up to 5 inmates crammed into a tiny 43-square-foot cell. Many don't even have a bed, so they're forced to sleep on the cold floor without a mattress. Because of the overcrowding, prisoners are stuck living very close to each other, which causes tension and leads to fights. In 2005, Amnesty International raised awareness about how desperate the prisoners were. Some were so hopeless that they sewed their mouths shut as a way to protest the poor living conditions. The prison didn't have a working sewage system, so inmates had to use plastic bags and bottles instead of toilets. The smell was awful, and it put everyone at risk of getting sick. Pavilion 5, a section of the prison that held the most dangerous inmates in Argentina, was so scary that even the guards didn't want to go inside. There were 90 men living there, and the guards were so afraid that they just left food at the door. With no supervision, the prisoners were left to take care of themselves, creating a dangerous and chaotic environment. An Italian photographer named Valerio Bisp was able to visit this part of the prison and take photos. His pictures showed just how bad things were in Pavilion 5, and when the public saw them, people were outraged. The situation was so bad that officials had to shut Pavilion 5 down. As hard as it is to imagine, there are prisons in the world that might be even worse. Gldani Prison. This prison in Georgia became the center of a shocking scandal that exposed serious mistreatment of inmates. On September 18, 2012, videos were leaked showing guards and their superiors harming, mocking, and abusing prisoners. Under the rule of the United National Movement Party, which took power in 2004, several reforms were made, but they also used harsh and cruel methods. The number of prisoners rose sharply, from 6,000 in 2003 to 24,000 in 2012. During this time, mistreatment of prisoners became more common, especially when they were in police custody. Inmates were subjected to terrible abuse, including beatings, electric shocks, and even worse. New prisoners were often greeted with a welcoming beating, meant to terrify them. The videos of the abuse were leaked by Vladimir Bedukadze, a former prison employee who fled to Belgium. Although he was briefly wanted for his role in the abuse, authorities decided not to pursue him further because he helped reveal the horrible things happening inside the prison system. The videos showed prisoners being beaten with sticks and insulted by guards in disturbing ways. In one clip, guards are seen physically abusing prisoners, while another shows an inmate being humiliated and forced to do degrading things. There were also recordings from a youth detention center where inmates were beaten and made to insult each other under threats. In this prison environment, the cruelty was so intense that the guards didn't always need to get physical. Fear alone was enough to control the prisoners. We've explored notorious prisons in various countries, but imagine an entire nation where every prison isn't just bad. Each one is a living nightmare. Hell in Peru. Peruvian prisons are violent, political, and filled with trade and corruption. Surviving in these overcrowded facilities is tough, and only those who can handle a brutal lifestyle make it through. Sarita Colonia Prison, the most overcrowded in the world, has no personal cells. Up to 15 prisoners are forced to live in a space meant for 4. Those who can't get a cell must sleep on mats in the hallways, and everything, even a bit of privacy, comes at a cost. To get a bed in a cell, prisoners must pay as much as $1,400, while a private cell can cost up to $5,000. Though prisons are built to hold 31,000 people across 68 facilities, there are currently nearly 68,000 inmates, creating severe overcrowding. This overcrowding makes it hard for prison administrations to provide basic needs like housing, food, water, sanitation, and medical care. Even family visits and legal assistance are affected by this overpopulation. As a result, prison life becomes even harder, with a constant threat of violence and unrest. The food situation is terrible too. While prisoners don't expect gourmet meals, what they do get is far worse. All that's provided is white rice and potatoes, and even that often runs out. With so many inmates, not everyone gets fed, and if you're not one of the first in line, you might have to fight for leftovers. If you have money though, you can buy better food. Some inmates cook meals with ingredients their families send and sell them to other prisoners for about $1.5. Money can also buy things like mobile phones, cigarettes, and even drugs. Most prisoners in Peru are serving long sentences, usually for drug trafficking, with many locked up for 8 years or more. Even behind bars, drug use continues. But guards often turn a blind eye. There's little entertainment, leading to widespread corruption, as guards overlook more and more misconduct. Though prisons have strict rules, enforcing them is complicated. Many prisoners feel they don't deserve the harsh treatment they receive. For example, one man caught with 25 ounces of cocaine was about to leave the country when he was arrested. On the surface, his punishment seemed fair since he was breaking the law, but the situation was more complex. He claims the guards beat him, even though he didn't resist or try to escape. Later, police tortured him for 2 weeks, pushing him to confess. He eventually admitted to having 664 grams of cocaine, even though he actually had 740 grams. The extra amount was allegedly taken by the police and not included in the report. Afterward, the authorities paraded him as an example, saying they had busted a major drug ring. News outlets reported he had been caught with 20 kilograms of cocaine, 20 times the actual amount. He soon realized he was up against a corrupt system designed to work against him. While it may seem like the authorities are doing their job, the reality is far more complex. The prison system appears to be upholding justice, but in truth, officials are profiting from daily bribes paid by prisoners just to obtain essentials that the facility should provide. The system of punishment may seem simple, but the truth is, it's often far more complicated. This situation shows just how unfair the legal system in Peru can be, especially when the authorities care more about protecting their own interests than doing what's right. It's crucial to examine these cases closely to ensure justice is served and that people's rights are protected. The conditions in Peru's prisons are truly horrifying. People can be locked away in these nightmarish facilities without ever being convicted of a crime. In fact, it can take over a year for some prisoners to get a trial date because the court system is so overwhelmed. During this time, they remain stuck in prison. A staggering 59% of prisoners in Peru have never been given a trial date. This means many innocent people are trapped in these awful conditions with no way out. This is a problem that desperately needs to be fixed. Most prisoners awaiting trials spend at least 9 months in pretrial detention, according to a report from a human rights group in Peru. In some cases, this can stretch on for up to a year and a half. However, there's an easy way to speed up the process: by paying bribes. Poor prisoners don't have the $1,000 needed to secure a court hearing, as one American inmate shared in his memoirs. So, how can we help those stuck in the system? Interestingly, the prisoners themselves have found a way to take matters into their own hands. Former inmates have described a working economy inside the prisons. Skilled prisoners sell their services to others for a fee, offering food, contraband, and other essentials. Some even extend their services beyond the prison walls. While the conditions in Peru's prisons are terrible, the resilience and creativity of the inmates offer a small glimmer of hope. But action is needed to make sure people aren't left in such awful conditions without being given a fair trial. Thank you for watching till the end. See you next time.